Hey guys, Nike here. I got a lot of positive feedback from the solo PvE Spellbreaker build, and people really seem to want me to continue this as a series, so why not? Let's do it. Today's build, as you can see, is a Ranger build for solo PvE using the Soulbeast Elite Specialization and some ridiculously busted gear and trait interactions. This build takes advantage of an extremely easy to play and easy to learn playstyle, along with extreme survivability and low opportunity cost of doing so by using Trailblazer gear. This build has good single target damage and is extremely tanky. And if you're a solo ranger player who is struggling, especially in HOT or POF or living story maps where the content's a little bit harder, this build will give you a huge advantage against the content that you have there. One thing I will mention is this build is not for fractals and not for raids. The DPS is not quite what groups would expect in a fractal or a raid, and additionally this build stacks a ton of toughness, and if you join a raid group with this build, you will be the tank. And your raid group will not appreciate it, and you will be kicked. So it is worth considering that fact. So I would highly recommend that if you are looking for a raid build, there are other guides and builds available. This is strictly for open world PvE and solo story and anything else that you want to play the game solo in, and definitely not a raid build, and definitely probably welcome in too many fractal groups either. So with that caveat out of the way, let's get into the game. I can't wait to talk about this build with you. Okay guys, for gear, we'll keep it very simple. We are going to use Trailblazers gear in every slot. Trailblazers is main stat toughness, main stat condi damage, secondary vitality, secondary expertise, which means we have big condi damage and 2 defensive stats. So we've maximized our condi damage and we're maximizing our defense all in one package. Trailblazers is awesome for any open world condi build, but it's especially awesome here because we utilize the short bow exclusively. And as a result, we don't care about the loss of power stats because skills don't do much power damage on the short bow in the first place. The DPS loss from Vipers to Trailblazers is rather insignificant in this build, but you do gain an immense amount of survivability. So it's a bit of a no-brainer to recommend Trailblazers on this. As far as weapons, we are going to go with 2 short bows, both Trailblazers of course. You could make do with just 1 short bow, but there are some weapon swap synergies in the build that make it optimal to have 2, and we'll discuss those. And on both of our weapons, we're going to take Sigil of Bursting and Sigil of Venom in order to maximize the type of damage that we're doing. The runes that we're going to take on our armor are going to be Superior Rune of the Crate. Pretty obvious what it does. Gives us a lot of condi damage and bleeding duration. There's a couple other combos that I considered. Rune of the Undead is always a good choice when discussing a Trailblazers based build. But since we don't get a lot of condi duration natively from our traits like some other condi builds, we do sort of have to build into that in our runes. And so the choice really becomes Rune of the Crate or a Nightmare Trapper or a 5 Nightmare setup. And I think the easiest thing to recommend is Rune of the Crate. It may or may not be a little bit different in terms of DPS from the Nightmare build one way or the other. But I think overall it is the easiest thing to recommend, and most people will benefit the most from this particular rune choice. Okay, so let's talk, since we've talked about the gear, we can talk a little bit about the optimal food choice in the build. So the optimal food choice that you want to run in this build is Plate of Beef Rendang. It gives you big condi damage and little expertise. The expertise doesn't really matter because we're bleed capped, but it does help our poison duration, which is not capped, so that's always good. And the condi damage is very, very nice. The utility nourishment that we're going to take is Magnanimous Tuning Crystals. In a Trailblazer build where we have a lot of vitality and a lot of toughness, these crystals do add a considerable amount of condi damage, and they're super helpful. One thing that I do think is worth mentioning is that pretty much any food that has main stat condi damage is going to be fine for you, and you should be able to do it and deal with that no problem. But in a Trailblazer build specifically, where you are super tanky, food that heals you is actually really good. Because you have very high toughness, the effectiveness of healing essentially is increased and provides much higher sustain than it would be in a Berserker or a Viper build. So a simple, cheap 1 copper food like peach pies that give you, I think it's like 75 health healed every second, in a Trailblazer build is going to be very, very effective. So if you're on an ultra budget and all you can afford are peach pies, go for it, use them. I think they'll serve you quite well in a build this tanky. So with the gear and stuff out of the way, we can move on to traits. All right, so discussing traits, the first thing I want to say is now's a good time to discuss the pet we're going to have. We're going to go with the Lynx, and when we merge with the Lynx, we'll talk about that a little bit when we get down to Soulbeast, but the Lynx gives us some nice synergies with condi builds that we'll discuss a little bit later, but that is our pet choice. So in this build, we're going to take Skirmishing, Wilderness Survival, and our elite specialization is going to be Soulbeast. Skirmishing gives us significant damage boosting traits, as well as some very valuable boon generation. Our choices are going to be Sharpened Edges, Hidden Barbs, and Light on Your Feet. Sharpened Edges and Hidden Barbs are very self-explanatory. Sharpened Edges gives you bleeds on crit. We don't crit as often as a full Viper build, but we still have a decent crit chance when all's said and done. And then Hidden Barbs is just a huge damage boost for our build. And I think Light on Your Feet is the one that requires a little bit of explanation, because you're going to see a lot of builds out there for the Condi Soulbeast that recommend Quick Draw. Quick Draw is a very good trait, but it does require you to manage your weapon swaps perfectly to get the most out of it, and it also requires you to manage your cooldowns. So in a chaotic fight, you really have to manage multiple things in your head at the same time. To a very veteran player, this isn't really a big deal, and cooldown works, and cooldown's especially good if you are using the build with Dagger Torch on swap, or Axe Torch on swap, because you can really get a lot of mileage out of the torch skills. But in this build, we're using double short bow, so we don't gain really a lot from Quick Draw. It's not really super useful for us, and in the end, we're going to benefit a lot more from Light on Our Feet. And Light on Our Feet has the added bonus of giving us a few quality of life things, as well as it just simplifies the playstyle of the build compared to Quick Draw. Light on Your Feet essentially has no drawback. You play normally, as you would, and you gain the benefit always. Light on Your Feet encourages you to dodge things and to try to flank the boss as much as possible. Both of those are things that you should want to do anyway in a build like this. So it's not really asking a ton of you to dodge things and try to flank mobs. Additionally, one of the weaknesses of this build is the inability to tag big groups of mobs. And Light on Your Feet allows your short bow shots to pierce, which will help a little bit in the regard of being able to tackle big groups of mini mobs. So the next trait line is Wilderness Survival, and we are going to take Taste for Danger, Ambidexterity, and Poison Master. Now, Wilderness Survival is a pretty balanced trait line in that it adds some DPS to the build and it also adds defense to the build. Essentially, every trait, including all the minors, is super useful to us, and really, it's just it really adds to our total package of what we're trying to do. So, Taste for Danger is great. It adds more vitality to us, which makes us tankier, and we get Condi duration based on percentage of vitality. In a Viper's build, this trait is just okay. In a Trailblazers build, this trait is busted. It is super good. So we definitely like Taste for Danger in this build. Ambidexterity doesn't do a ton for us because we're not wielding a torch or a dagger, but we still do gain the 120 Condi damage, and so we like that, and it adds some to the build. And then, of course, Poison Master. We will be using our Beast skill on cooldown, so we'll gain the benefit of some extra poison damage. Nothing really game-changing from Poison Master, but it's just an overall good trait. So the minor traits are worth talking about because they have a lot of synergy, and they help us do a lot of things. So Natural Vigor, we recover endurance more quickly, meaning we get to dodge more often. Companion's Defense, we gain protection when we dodge. So you can kind of see where this is going. We get to dodge more, and when we dodge, we get protection. And then Rugged Growth is while we have protection, we get a pretty fat heal every second. So generally speaking, every dodge is going to give us 2 seconds of protection, which is going to give us 2 heals from Rugged Growth. So there's just this really nice synergy throughout the trait line where it's get to dodge more, so you avoid damage, and when you do dodge, you get tankier, and then when you do take a little bit of damage, you're tankier, so you don't die, and you heal up quickly. The whole thing really gives us a very nice defensive layer to the build. The last trait line is our elite specialization, which is Soulbeast, and it gives us some very nice bonuses, but honestly, there's really nothing game-changing or insane about Soulbeast. I do recommend it over Beast Mastery, which would be the other option, I would say. It is still better, in my opinion, than Beast Mastery, but there's nothing super insane with Soulbeast, so if you want to experiment with Core Ranger and try Beast Mastery, you can definitely do that, but I will still recommend Soulbeast, and I will explain what it does for us. Foremost, Soulbeast allows us to merge with our pet, which in this case is the Lynx, and we like the Lynx because it boosts our Condi damage, which we like. It boosts our precision, which thereby boosts our critical chance. It's only giving us like a 4.75% boost to our critical chance, but since we have bleeds on crit and we have a very low crit chance, we want every last percent we can get. There are a few things that are working behind the scenes to make our crit chance higher. For most fights, we are going to have Fury, so we're going to be automatically at about 30% crit chance. And then we have Hunter's Tactics. When we're flanking bosses, we will be getting another 10, so we're close to 40. So 40% crit chance is nothing to sneeze at, and it will help us out quite a bit on getting some nice procs from our sharpened edges. But in any event, that is the benefit of critting a bit more in this build. And a 40% crit chance when you don't have any precision from your gear isn't too bad. So we're going to take Live Fast, Predator's Cunning, and Leader of the Pack. Live Fast is great because when we use a Beast ability, we gain offensive boons, quickness, and fury. Our Beast ability is Primal Cry. Basically, we roar at the enemies, we make them vulnerable, and we give them bleeds. So Vuln is great because it's a straight 9% damage boost, and bleeds are great because they are damage. Additionally, the fury and the quickness, those are both going to help us out quite a bit. So this is giving us 6 seconds of fury on a 20-second cooldown. We have Furious Grip. When you swap weapons, you gain 5 seconds of fury. So every 9 seconds, we get 5 seconds of fury, and every 20 seconds, we gain 6 seconds of fury. So it's not 100% fury uptime, But with Strength of the Pack at the beginning of a fight, we have a pretty good buffer at the beginning of most fights of Fury, and we keep it up quite a bit with that. Predator's Cunning is just another trait that's going to help us heal. We get Life Siphon, essentially, when we poison a foe, which is great. Like I was talking about earlier with the food, anything that gives us a little bit more heals is magnified in a build this tanky. If you're playing a Berserker or a Viper build where you get one hit a lot, or you get hit and you go from full health down to 10%, a little 170 heal every so often isn't going to be super great at making you more survivable. But when you get hit hard by a boss and you lose like 2k health, these little heal per seconds are going to get you topped back up pretty quickly, and it's going to keep you from really taking too much pressure in too many fights. So it's not a huge boost or a huge gain, but it does go with making us super tanky, which is the name of the game in this build. And then our Grandmaster is Leader of the Pack. We're only really using one shout, so you could potentially take Oppressive Superiority, which will give you a 10% Condi damage or Condi duration increase. The duration, since we're already capped on bleeds, really only applies to poison. So the question then becomes, do you want longer duration poisons or more poisons? I'm going with Leader of the Pack for more poisons, simply because getting longer duration Vulture Stance also gives us more might, in addition to the poisons. And might is, when we're solo, we're not going to come anywhere close to capping might. So the more might you can get, the more damage you're going to do. So might is good, and therefore I believe that Leader of the Pack is also good. Plus, every now and then you'll be fighting something in the open world, and you will have allies with you. There'll be like a couple guys that show up in the middle of an event and are helping you do the event. You will now give them some buffs with Vulture Stance and help them do more damage. So it's not a bad choice at all. And so that's the traits, guys. And with that out of the way, let's talk about skills. Alright guys, so skills. Our healing skill is going to be Troll Unguent. Some people might advocate for others, but in a build as tanky as this, a heal over time tends to be better than a one-shot big heal. And since this build is looking for that, Troll Unguent is very strong in that regard. Some people might suggest going with We Heal as one. However, I would say that we don't generate a lot of boons, and our pets don't generate a lot of boons for us. So We Heal as one loses a lot of value. I definitely think in a Viper's build, or a build that is just generating tons of boons, or in a group play situation where you have other people giving you a bunch of boons, We Heal as one is a very strong choice. But in a build primarily engaged on being solo, where we're not going to have a lot of boons, Troll Unguent is just the best heal in terms of overall survivability. Next up is Vulture Stance. Vulture Stance, as I mentioned, is going to give us a big damage boost, both from the extra poison and the extra might. Both sides of the equation are valuable to us. And you should, when you're in a fight, you should be using Vulture Stance definitely on cooldown. Viper's Nest is a trap, and it adds a bunch of poisons and is a big AoE. And it is one of the things that's going to help us deal with big groups of mobs, because that is, as I said, one of the weaknesses of this build, is if you're attacked by 30 mobs at once, you really just don't have you don't have Meteor Shower that an Ellie, a staff Ellie would have. So really, this build is very limited in what it has for AoE, and Viper's Nest is one of those big AoEs that actually works for this build. So I definitely highly recommend Viper Stance. Or Viper's Nest. And then our last one is Sharpening Blade, which is the other side of the coin. Sharpening Blade is a nice single target boost, by allowing us to start the fight with a nice fat set of 10 bleed stacks very quickly at the beginning of the fight. And you can get very tricky with this, where if you know you have a fight coming up, you can cast Sharpening Stone, start the fight, or I should say you cast Sharpening Stone. You have the buff on you, as you can see, and the buff lasts for 30 seconds, and the whole time the skill's on cooldown. When the skill gets to about 10 seconds left on cooldown, you start attacking the boss. Right as you run out of your 10 buffs for Sharpening Stone, it'll be off cooldown, and you can cast it again. So you basically get 2 uses back to back of Sharpening Stone, and it's a nice little trick. And you can do something sort of, well, you can't really do the same thing because Viper Stance doesn't last long enough, but you can always precast these things, especially Sharpening Stone, to maximum effect when you can plan your engagement. So elite skill is not really set in stone. In my opinion, Rampage of 1 is the most default choice, but there are reasons to try the others depending on the situations. This build, as I said, doesn't generate a lot of boons. So the boons you get from Strength of the Pack is really, really good. You will benefit quite a bit from Strength of the Pack in terms of the Fury giving you crit chance, the stability meaning you're going to be able to handle the boss's CCs, and the swiftness is also no joke. And we attack a lot, so we generate a lot of might. And so, as a result, Strength of the Pack is the way to go. The thing I do want to say, as always, is in solo play, you have to be willing to change your build as the situation requires. Solo PvE has a lot more variety of situations that you can find yourself in compared to raids or fractals, which are more like predictable clockwork encounters. So you must be willing to change out a skill that's ineffective in your current situation for one that would be more valuable in another. So don't consider any of these skill choices set in stone. Do what you gotta do to survive the encounter that you find yourself in. So with the skills out of the way, let's discuss how the build plays in the playstyle. As always, guys, I will not be showing a DPS rotation on a golem for this build or any other builds I do in this series. The fact is, when you're playing solo, stuff either dies incredibly quickly, so all you need to really learn is an opening burst, or it requires too much movement and dodging and blocking to really qualify as a DPS rotation. What matters most in the end is getting your high damage skills off during windows of opportunity, and this usually entails some particular skills that are key that I do want to discuss. So as far as the playstyle goes, one important function of this build is weapon swapping on cooldown. While we don't use quick draw, weapon swapping still gives us fury and swiftness, and those are very important. Using your beast skill on cooldown also gives fury in addition to the vuln that it generates. And between that and the weapon swap, you should have a very reliable amount of fury uptime. So your money skills with this build are bow 2 and bow 4. Be sure to use them on cooldown to maximize your damage. Bow 2 is a fan shot skill that shoots multiple projectiles, and it shotguns. So be sure to be at close range when you fire it so that all the projectiles hit the target that you want. Skill 3 on your bar is an evade, and using it, even if you don't actually evade an attack, procs light on your feet. So be sure to use it liberally. It's a pretty good combo to move into close range to use skill 2, and then when the mob that you're fighting swings back at you, you use skill 3 to dodge out of it away from the attack and gain light on your feet. Skill 4 is just a general damage skill and cripples the mob, so makes you harder to hit. And skill 5 is a heavy CC and is handy for all CC purposes. Now, remember, you guys do significantly more damage while flanking or behind your target, so endeavor to always be flanking. It won't be possible in many fights because the boss will always try to turn to face you, but don't let that stop you from trying. A lot of fights you will be moving around the boss in circles and peppering it from range, moving in to use skill 2, and evading back out with skill 3, and continuing to pepper the boss from range with your auto attacks. And that's generally the flow of the build and how it fights. Alright, so that's it, guys. I hope you really enjoyed this build guide, and I hope any of you Soulbeast players out there, or any Ranger players in general out there, get some value out of it. If you have any questions or comments, tips, tricks, please leave them below. I'd like to hear what you have to say about it. If you want me to continue this series, let me know. I have ideas for other professions. I have especially some very out-of-the-box ideas for some other professions. So if you'd like me to continue, let me know, and I will take that into consideration. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you next time.